Welcome, friends and listeners, Brandon Inquisitors. I'm Jake.
I'm Jax. We're your Elantrian educators. Join us this week as we dive into the Coppermind.
Let's go. Episode 1 of Elantris.
Yes. Getting in, we are going to be doing the prologue and the first 3 chapters of Elantris today.
Are you excited?
I'm excited.
I'm so excited.
I'm pumped.
I did so much research, and I find like something's coming of it.
Admittedly, Jake did more research than I did, but only barely. Only barely.
You'll hardly notice it.
You won't notice it.
They might notice it a little bit.
No. Because what you guys are going to come to understand is I know the names of everybody and Jake knows nobody's name. So it's going to feel like I did more research.
But I'll have the book in front of me.
Yeah.
So if I'm talking about someone, I can just find their name on the page.
I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Sometimes Jake will read a paragraph on the page, look up to talk about it, and forget the name of the person. It will happen, I promise.
He's not wrong. It will happen multiple times, probably every single episode.
But that's fine. He'll just look back down.
That's fine.
Or I'll just give him the name.
Real quick, guys, we're going to pause the episode for the spoiler warning. In this episode, we get into topics about Elantris, Tress of the Emerald Sea, Warbreaker, and the Stormlight Archive up to Oathbringer. So if you haven't read any of those, this is your spoiler warning.
Perfect. Let's jump right into it. Honestly,
we're right into it.
I don't think there's anything else left to say. Let's just jump right into it.
We dragged that out long enough?
I think so.
All right.
Okay, guys. Before we get into the prologue,
You said jump right into it.
I'm jumping into it.
Oh, okay.
But before the prologue, there is a foreword by none other than Mr. Dan Wells.
Who's Dan Wells?
Dan Wells is a buddy of Brandon Sanderson, who back in like the early 2000s was in a writing group with Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
So as Brandon was writing Elantris, he was actively, giving it to these people in this group and like, how's this? And they'll give him feedback.
Right.
Now, before Elantris was Elantris, it was a little story called The Spirit of Adonis.
Okay.
And you know who Adonis is.
Yes, he's somebody from Greek mythology.
Yeah, so he's just a character in a short little Greek mythology story. And I'm bringing this up because the story of this Greek mythology character actually kind of fits with the story of Elantris.
Okay. So, yeah, for those of you who didn't follow that, Brandon had originally titled this book as The Spirit of Adonis.
Mm-hmm. Not
realizing that Adonis was an actual person. He thought he had come up with that name himself.
Yeah. So he went to Dan, and Dan was kind of like, why the Spirit of Adonis?
Like Dan read the book,
yeah,
waiting for it to tie into Adonis in some form.
Yeah. And so he was like, Adonis is a character from Greek mythology, and Brandon was just like, totally forgot that. So he eventually renamed it to the Spirit of Elantris, and then drops the spirit, and it's just Elantris. But the story of Adonis, just a short version of it, basically he was this real handsome guy, stud. He was loved by Aphrodite.
Okay.
Dude gets killed by a boar. Blech. Dick.
Right. Okay.
Aphrodite comes down and is holding his body, and his blood and Aphrodite's tears mix together, and they create the anemone flower.
Okay.
Pretty sure that's how you pronounce that.
Cool. I've never heard of that.
Anemone flower. But the base
Anemone? Anemone?
Is it an enemy? Anemone.
And then anemone.
An enemy.
An enemy.
I feel like it would be anemone though, like just being Greek.
Okay, but the anemone is like an actual thing.
Yeah, but it's like a thing in the ocean. It's like what Finding Nemo lives in, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I don't think it applies here.
Okay.
Did you figure it out?
I mean, it's a pretty flower. I can tell you that much.
Okay, cool.
I, that's all I got for you.
Okay.
I think it's an enemy.
The whole reason we bring this up, the whole reason I bring this up is because the story at its base is supposed to be about life, death, and then rebirth, which most of you have read Elantris fits in really well because the characters live,
Die.
they quote unquote die by being taken by the Sheod, and then are reborn again as like full Elantrians. So, just thought I'd put that in there. I thought it was kind of cool.
Love it. An enemy, by the way.
Okay,
Looked it up.
I'm still gonna say Anamane.
Okay, that's totally fine.
Okay, and then right into the prologue.
No, before we get to the prologue, we've got some maps.
Okay, so sorry guys, we're not jumping right into it. We just we're putting that off a little more.
So we do have just 3 different maps right at the beginning of this book. We got a map of Arelon. And for those of you who, well, I guess we didn't start out with this the way that we should have. If you haven't read this book before, this is not a first time read along type podcast.
Spoiler warning!
Spoiler warning, we will be talking about the entirety of the Cosmere, tying it in. We'll be talking about the end of this book, the beginning of this book. There's spoilers galore. So if you haven't read the book and you don't know what happens, fair warning.
Turn this off.
We're going to ruin it for you. But the map of Arelon has got, obviously, the shoreline that's straight across. It's got the mountain range that curves down the side a little bit. And then it's got the Lake Alanoe, right in the center. And that is your Aeon, is that depiction there. And then it just gives the names of all of the little provinces inside of Arelon.
Yeah, for those of you on YouTube, we'll probably throw this map up on the screen along with a picture of Aeon, so you can kind of compare and see what we're talking about. So I guess let's make sure everyone has a base knowledge of what Aeons are.
Okay.
Because that's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire book. So the Aeons.
Let's talk about Aeons not in relationship to Aeon Door real quick. What are just Aeons?
So Aeons are the basis of language and magic in Arelon. Arelon being the main country our story takes place in. So you'll see a lot of Aeons used in names, and we're going to be pointing out basically every Aeon we see the first time we see it, and also telling you like what it means.
Yep.
So there's a strong use of Aeons within names, and then also Aeons are how people use magic in Arelon. And we'll get into that a little more as we're going through the story. But just so you know, we're going to point out basically every Aeon in anything we see, just so you, as the listener, kind of, feel the deep dive.
It's a deep dive.
It's a deep dive.
Now, that being said, that is going to make this first episode a little lengthy because we're going through the first 3 chapters of the book. We are introducing you to all these new characters, and a lot of their names include those Aeons. So bear with us through that. That won't be every episode because we're not going to point them out every time we see them. We're just going to kind of point them out the first time they come around, just so you know what they are, why they're there, and what they mean. And then if a new character comes up with similar Aeon, we'll point it out. We'll say, we've already seen this in so-and-so's name. Yeah. It still means this.
Going through this book, though, we are going to be kind of treating it like you have read this book. So we're not going to get caught up in semantics of explaining that, Raoden is the Prince of Arelon or anything like that. Like, we're going to assume these characters, but we're just going to kind of point out the nuances of anything we see within the chapters.
But Raoden is the Prince of Arelon.
If you didn't know.
Which
I hope you do.
If you don't, turn off the podcast.
If you don't, this isn't the podcast for you, okay? All right, so map of Arelon, we kind of see Aeon in the land, which Aeon is the base for every single Aeon.
Right.
You can find Aeon
In every
in every Aeon.
Yeah.
I know we just said Aeon like 17 times in one sentence. Get used to it.
Okay.
Yeah. We also get a neat little compass that has the Aeons Atto, Ke.
Yeah, so it'd be Ato, Ke, Toei. Toei? It feels like it should be Toa, but I'm pretty sure
I
it's
think
Toei.
Toei.
And then Aki. Now, forgive us on our pronunciation because we're basically just going off of the style that
The audiobooks use.
the audiobooks use. So, Michael Kramer's pronunciation. However, there are some things in here that Michael Kramer gets wrong.
Oh, Michael Kramer doesn't do the audiobook for Elantris.
Oh, he doesn't.
No, it's someone else.
Okay, that's my bad.
It's fine. But these Aeons on this compass mean north, east, south, and west.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool. You just get a little Aeon compass, which I thought was neat.
Yes, so the next map takes us into a view of Elantris and then a view of Kai.
Again, for people watching on YouTube, we'll throw them on the screen.
If you're listening on Spotify, sorry.
Go over to YouTube, I guess.
But the audiobook pronounces this city as Kai. We're going to call it Kai here for this podcast, but it should be Ke.
Yeah.
It is an Aeon. It means east. As the Aeons go, this should be Ke. But
It's funny because there's actually a region in Erelon that's actually called Kai. It's like Kai.
that would be Ki.
Okay, so like it's wrong both ways. I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
We're calling it Kai. We also get to see kind of you have to kind of squint to see it, but the city of Elantris was built in the shape of Aeon Ella.
Yes.
Or Ele?
Ela.
I think it would be Ele if we're doing
Oh,
A for
you're right.
everything.
Ele.
We're gonna say Ella because it's Elantris.
Elantris. Yeah.
So it's actually built in the shape of Aeon Ella.
Yes.
And then Elantris with the 4 cities around it is shaped in the Aeon Reo,
Correct.
which means spirit. Aeon Ella means center or focus.
Yes.
So it all kind of fits. I mean, the Aeon Reo doesn't fit yet, but it'll fit, I promise. Just you wait. And then we get a full view of the continent, which Cycla if you're Fjorden, but if you're from Erelon or Teod, it's going to be called Opilon.
Yes.
So those are interchangeable.
Yeah. So basically, the west half of the continent, or I guess we could say the Aki half of the continent.
You're funny.
The west half of the continent basically calls the continent Opilon, Opilon, and the east half calls it Cycla, and that just kind of, draws the division because Opilon is based off of an Aeon.
Mm-hmm.
There's Aeon Elo,
Yes.
and Aeon Elo means flower. Sorry, no, it's not Aeon Elo. It's Aeon Opa.
Opa. Yeah.
Yes, there's Aeon Opa in Opilon. That means flower. But over in Fjorden, they don't use Aeons. That's not part of their language.
No, they actually,
So,
I would assume they would think it blasphemous.
yeah, probably. So they call it Cycla.
Yep. Okay, cool. Now, guys, let's get in
prologue.
Let's get into the prologue. Dive right in. At the beginning of each chapter, including the prologue, there's an Aeon at the top of each chapter. And we're going to be pointing them out. We're going to be pointing out probably why that Aeon was put at this chapter and all those.
Right.
So for prologue, it's Aeon Reo, which means spirit or essence.
Right.
And
for those of you on YouTube, you can see it right here.
And for those of you on Spotify, you can hear it right here. Aeon Reo. That was dumb.
Yes, it was. But Aeon Reo is basically 4 circles surrounding a square, more or less.
Which fits the prologue perfectly because it's talking about Elantris, and that's essentially the shape of Elantris and the 4 cities surrounding it.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so we start off with banger of a line from Brandon.
As we do.
Elantris was beautiful once.
4 beautiful words right there to just like
Bop, 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 bop.
get us into the story. I'm hooked. Like I read those 4 words and I'm on the line, you know?
You're like, why was it beautiful once?
I am. And maybe I'm a sucker for that. Maybe I am. But I read those 4 lines and I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's dive in.
You get your answer within the next eight words. Why it was beautiful once. It's because it was the city of the gods. There you go.
There you go, right there.
But now you're like, who are these gods? So Brandon just like really hooking us. We're in it.
Almost like he's like a best-selling author or something. Crazy.
That's crazy. What's even crazier is that this was his first published work.
True.
And he's already hooking us. So,
Hook, line, and sinker, bro. Actually, the sinker comes down at the bottom of this page.
yes,
We're
it
going to
does.
get there in a second.
Okay, moving on. It goes on to explain that Elantris was a city that glowed and that it was lived in by people with brilliant white hair and glowing silvery skin, and basically gods is who lived in this city.
Right.
Um,
You know, it was called the City of the Gods.
yeah, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Legends claim that they were immortal, or at least nearly so, which I highlighted and wrote a little note to the side, basically saying, like, because they're highly invested, which...
Like why they're immortal?
Yeah.
Functionally immortal?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I would have to assume so, just because we know that people who are highly invested basically stop aging.
Right.
So if these Elantrians are essentially immortal to where, like, they live forever unless, like, someone stabs them, right?
Right.
Even.
So even that.
Even then.
Even then. But we know that Elantrians are more highly invested than returned.
Yes, that was confirmed by Brandon, in a words of Brandon.
Right. And returned, is it they automatically reach the 5th heightening with their single breath?
I think so.
Okay. So, and we know that the 5th heightening, like even if a regular person, I think, reaches the 5th heightening, they
stop aging.
stop aging.
Yeah.
It might even be the 3rd heightening. I can't remember which heightening it is, but I think at least by the 5th heightening, you stop aging. So if we can say this person who's this highly invested is no longer aging, and we know that Elantrians are higher than that, I think that's a fair assumption to make.
Yeah. 5th heightening, we're talking about breath, by the way, if anyone didn't connect that.
Yeah.
Another thing I wrote, which, like, could have been another reason why, is basically Elantrians don't have to fear death because they can, like, heal any wound, and you know, they never go hungry.
Right, but I feel like, yeah, you can heal any wound, but can you reverse, like, time? Like, I feel like they do stop aging. Like, yeah, they don't fear death because they can heal any wound, but they also do stop aging. I think it's both of them.
So I think it's probably the highly invested part of it, though.
Yeah.
Yep. And then it just goes on to explain Elantrians a little more. And it ends that, or after that explanation, it goes, and anyone could become one, which I wrote, not quite, kind of,
Not quite, kind of, maybe a little bit.
Oh, go for it.
We know that in order to become an Elantrian, your spirit web, which is a topic we're going to dive into later in our podcast, is spirit webs. But it's basically just like your soul, your identity, like your connection to
Everything.
the earth. Everything.
Yeah.
Your connection to investiture, I would almost say. If you don't know what investiture is, go watch our previous episode where we introduced the Cosmere.
Yep.
But your spirit web is basically your connection to everything. And we know that in order to become an Elantrian, your spirit web has to be connected to Erelon.
Yes.
Or
you have to be invited into a specific group. Now, that one's kind of like, we've only seen it once, and spoiler for Tress of the Emerald Sea, Hoyd, at the end of Tress of the Emerald Sea, gets invited into a group and becomes an Elantrian.
yes.
So we've only seen that once. it's still kind of like unknown on how that works.
Yeah.
But for a regular schmegular, you have to be spiritually tied to the land of Erelon. This invested art is very specific to, or like it's very unique because it's tied to the land itself.
Yes, it's locationally based.
Yeah.
Which most investitures,
I think every investiture except for this one.
that's probably accurate.
Yeah. So that's why we were like, not quite, like not anyone can,
Right.
but then like anyone can because you can be invited.
Anyone can because you can be invited, and it's just like you don't have to be born in Erelon.
No.
You just have to consider Erelon your home.
And spiritually be connected to it.
Yes. And it's interesting. In this book, it talks about how nobody from Fjordell ever becomes an Elantrian.
Mhm.
But people from Teod can, and people from Duladel can, even if they weren't born in Erelon. And I think just because of the difference in religion and the difference in like everything, nobody from Fjordell has ever considered Erelon home, regardless of how long they live there.
Yeah.
They still consider Fjordell home, and so they never grow that spiritual connection.
Yeah. Do we ever see anyone from Teod
Become an Elantrian?
become an Elantrian?
Not specifically on screen,
I
I don't
don't
think,
think
but
so.
I know it says in here that Teod people can.
Okay. You'll have to point it out because I don't remember that part.
Yeah, it's going to be a few chapters in. It's
That's
not, It's not in this episode.
That's fine. Okay. And then it goes on to explain the Sheod and what that is. Sheod has an Aeon in it. It's Aeon Sheo, and that means transformation or change.
Correct.
So the Sheod is basically when a normal person randomly becomes an Elantrian.
Right. And we are not super clear on how this happens.
Not even Chris in the Ars Arcanum is super clear on how that happens.
Yeah, she studied it. She can't figure it out. We've studied it. We can't figure it out.
Yeah. And she like we're pretty good at this Cosmere stuff, but she's like the Cosmere researcher.
Yes.
You know, on screen.
If you don't know who we're talking about one of our favorite world hoppers, Duchess Chrysala. She's the one who writes all the Ars Arcanums in the back of the books. So Chris, when we refer to Chris as a scholar, as a researcher, she is an on-screen, in-world researcher, world hopper that does a lot of investigations into investiture and power systems throughout the Cosmere.
Yep. And then it goes on to say that that person's life is ends and then began anew, which fits into my Adonis claim that it fits into Elantris. So thanks, go me, I guess. And yeah.
Their life ends. It begins anew. They would discard their old life, move to Elantris, and they'd live in Elantris where they could live in bliss, rule in wisdom, and be worshipped for eternity.
Then a banger line. Eternity ended 10 years ago.
3 paragraphs.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Hook, line, sinker. 3 paragraphs. Right
I'm
there.
following Brandon.
And we're in.
And we're in. Okay, part 1, Shadow of Elantris. Let's go.
Let's go.
The Aeon for chapter 1 is Aeon, which means first or language. So obviously it's used probably in the way of first rather than language here, because this is the first time we are seeing Raoden. This is the first chapter. Yeah, let's dive in.
So we wake up with Prince Raoden.
Mm-hmm. Aeon, Reo, meaning spirit.
Yes. And he is Prince of Erelon.
Aeon, Eri, which means unity.
Yes. And again, another banger line right at the top here. It says, Prince Raoden of Erelon awoke early that morning, completely unaware that he had been damned for all eternity.
Banger.
Hooked.
Let's learn about Raoden.
So obviously Raoden lives in the city of Kai. And that's Aeon Ke, meaning east. And the reason it's named that is just because it's the city that sits east of Elantris.
Yep.
It is now the only inhabited city of the 4 cities surrounding Elantris.
Yep.
The other 3 only have like beggars in them that are
Yeah, people that ran away, people
Yeah.
that,
they're hiding. There,
they're not
basically.
cities.
Yeah, there's no structure, there's no society in any of the three cities because of the Riode, which we will get into in a second.
Yep.
Making it hard to sustain all of them.
So he wakes up, and he can't help but notice the city of Elantris out his window. And he just talks about it for a little bit on how, it's a fallen city and how dark it is. And then he realizes, or I should say, he notices how warm he is for such an early hour.
Yeah.
Which is just a little like clue. If you're on like your second or third reread, you know that Elantrians can't get cold.
Yeah.
So even though it's early, he's not cold. It's your first little clue to know that he has been turned into an Elantrian.
I think it's more that they are cold, and so they never feel cold.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Elantrians
Because their bloods
are
don't.
dead.
Yeah, their blood doesn't run.
Yeah.
So like they don't know warmth. Like their body's just cold enough that no amount of cold could affect them.
That's kind of how it feels. Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that. Because
I think it's said later, so we'll have to come back to that later.
But it brings up the question, like, what if it's negative 50 degrees out?
Then they might feel cold. And I think it does mention later. It's not that they can't get cold. It's just that they're cold, and so they don't feel cold.
I think they can't get cold because their body's in between and nothing changes about their body. We'll have to confirm later when it talks about it more.
It's not that nothing changes about the body. Because the muscles atrophy. That's a change.
Okay, you're right. It's not that nothing changes about their body, but like it is.
Let's know in the comments what you think.
Are Elantrians cold or Elantrians can't get cold because they're already cold, or can Elantrians just not get cold at all?
That's the question.
That's the question.
Moving on.
Another question, do you think they could get hot? So like if it's like 100 degrees out, do you think Elantrians are sweating?
No, they're not.
So I think that proves you wrong, does it not?
I don't think it does.
But your whole argument is that they can't get cold because they're already cold. Can they not get hot because they're already hot?
Let us know what you think.
Okay, moving on.
The other thing he noticed, or one other thing he noticed, is he was hungry.
Yes.
Like,
very
hungry.
Ravenous.
Ravenous, it says. It's a very descriptive word by Brandon there. He was ravenous.
No, he's
almost ravenous.
Almost ravenous.
Almost ravenous.
Not quite ravenous.
Not yet. Give him a few weeks. He'll get there. He says he had never liked large breakfasts, but this morning he found himself waiting impatiently for his meal to arrive.
So, just hint number 2. I think Brandon gives us 3 hints that he's an Elantrian before he says he's an Elantrian.
Yeah.
So, hint number 2, he's super hungry, which usually he's not in the morning.
Right. Hint number 3.
His Sion.
He calls for his Sion.
Aim.
Yes.
Aeon Aim, which means wisdom.
Wisdom. Sions are another manifestation of investiture on Cell.
Yep. They're actually splinters of the shards.
Correct.
So we know Cell has 2 shards, Dominion and Devotion. They're not really alive at this point, which we'll get into more as we talk about the door. But they're splinters of, I think, Devotion.
Sions are?
Yeah, and then Skays
are
splinters of Dominion.
Yeah.
Basically, what a splinter is when enough investiture is put in one spot, it will eventually gain consciousness.
Yeah.
We see this with Spren in Roshar.
Mm-hmm.
So samesies, but kind of a little different.
Yes. But same thing. Spren on Roshar, at least like Radiant Spren, are splinters.
Yes.
Not necessarily of a splintered.
No, the
shard.
The shard doesn't have to be splintered
in order
for it to have
splinters.
Splinters.
Yes.
Kind of confusing verbiage there
by Brandon.
But that's just how it is.
Yes.
We live with it. Also, Sion has 2 aeons in it. Ooh. the first one is Sio, which means loyalty or service, and the second one is Eon, which means willpower.
Okay.
So service fits really well because we know Sions to be basically attendants to their master.
And they're tied, like
Yeah.
spiritually tied
Yep.
to the people that they serve. So much so that when one of them goes through the Sheod, their Sion loses sanity,
Yep.
basically.
So that's hint number 3. The Sion's not there because the Sion went insane, and
is typically they migrate toward Elantris. We don't really know why that is, but you'll find a lot of just mindless Sions floating around Elantris, kind of.
Yep. So Raoden is waiting for breakfast, and he takes a look at Elantris one more time, and he notes that it's not a city anymore. It's just the corpse of one, which is just fitting because we will learn that Elantris is basically filled with essentially corpses.
Yeah. And we learn that the city itself is
kind of alive.
Well, yeah, like was kind of alive and now isn't, and
Yeah.
is falling apart because of it.
Yep.
So a corpse is a pretty fitting thing. And it says right there, right at the end, Raoden shivered. You know, he's looking at Elantris, he sees the corpse of the city, and he shivers, even though he can't get cold.
Yeah. Oh, you just mentioned he can't get cold, so we know these shivers are directly just like him kind of getting creeped out almost.
Yeah.
Yep. And so knock came at his door. It's his breakfast. It's brought by an old maid named Eleo. Eleo?
Eleo? I don't know.
I think Eleo.
Eleo.
Which actually has the same Aeon as Elantris, Aeon Ella, which means focus and center. I don't know if that really fits her.
Because this is the only line that we will see her in the entire book.
And she doesn't really have much focus, if I'm being honest. She kind of loses focus and runs away.
Yeah, so she drops the tray of bread. Raoden doesn't know what's going on because all he knows is he wanted breakfast and his maid just dropped his tray of food.
She whispers, "Merciful Domai," which Domai has Aeon Omai in it, which means love. And it actually fits really well because Domai is the god of the Karathi religion on Cell.
And she clutches her Karathi pendant. So it gives us just like an introduction into what the religion is here. We've got Domai, which is their god, and we've got Karathi, which is the name of their religion.
Yeah. So Raoden reached out and the maid goes running. I think it's kind of funny here that it says she stumbles on a small melon. Like they were just bringing Raoden a full melon to munch on for breakfast, you know? I just thought that was funny. And Raoden's kind of like, what? You know? And then he sees his hands.
Yeah.
And
he like probably throws his hands up like, what was that about?
Yeah.
And then he looks at his hands and freaks out.
And they're, the skin's gone gray, ashen, and there's black splotches. And so he like runs back into his room, trips over some furniture, looks in the mirror, and the face staring back at him is a complete stranger, except for his eyes.
Yes, his blue eyes were the same, though wide with terror.
Yep. And this is when we finally hear that the Sheod had come upon him. So he has been transformed into an Elantrian, and we're about to learn exactly what that entails for him.
Yeah, what happens to Elantrians now.
Yep. So the next line says, "The Elantris city gate boomed shut behind him with a shocking sound of finality."
Yeah, so it goes on to say his father, King Iadon, hadn't met Raoden's gaze as he ordered the priest to prepare his son and throw him into Elantris. So there's a couple things to unpack there. One, Iadon has an Aeon in it.
Aeon, Iad? Yeah, Iad?
Iad?
IAD, which means trust and reliable.
Which, from what we know about King Iadon.
So, he's not a very trustworthy man as king.
Yeah.
I think it actually fits in pretty well for when he was a merchant,
Okay.
because we know that he was actually the leader of the merchant guild.
Right.
And to get that high, I would assume like a lot of people have to trust you and you have to be pretty reliable as a merchant.
Right.
So pre King Iadon, probably pretty reliable and trustworthy.
Yes.
Maybe a little less trustworthy because he might have made some sketchy deals.
Yeah. But one thing also to note is these names are assigned to these people at birth, and their parents have no idea how they're going to grow up to be. So it's not like
we got to assume that any coincidences they're just coincidences.
Yeah.
But what if it's not?
What if the
Aeon
in their name has power over their spirit web to like help them transform into what their name is?
Maybe.
Kind of crazy.
Don't know how that maid is going to be focus or center, but
but there are Aeons that we see in people's names that just
match them.
fit.
Yes.
Such as Serini,
Yep.
right? Who is our other on-screen character or like POV character.
Yep.
In chapter 2, Aeon Ini is in her name, which means wit and cleverness.
Which is just perfect for her.
Yes. So, yes, there are some coincidences in like the names. Some of them line up. Some of them don't line up so much. But they, in my opinion, are purely coincidental or author's liberty on Brandon's part to just kind of match their names up.
Yep. We go on to get a small little part of Raoden that feels unlike him. Again, his world probably just like got flipped upside down, so maybe forgive him a little, but he has a bit of like almost condescending vibes here. He goes, the Sheod was a thing that happened to other people, distant people, people who deserved to be cursed, not the Crown Prince of Erelon, not Raoden.
A little bit of pride showing through there.
Yeah, which we don't really see much with Raoden. He's usually a very, humble, nice guy.
Yeah. I called out that line for a slightly different reason, because I cut off before it said people who deserve to be cursed. But it was just, for me, the Sheod was a thing that happened to other people, distant people. And that was a real good, like, real life correlation for me of, like, bad things always happen to other people in the sense of, like, huge tragedies you hear about, like, all this stuff, until it happens to you, you know? And you're never prepared for it when it does, whether that be, losing a family member or whatever it is. You're never prepared because it always happens to other people until it happens to you. And that's what Raoden's going through right now.
Yep. And so he goes on to kind of explain the scene that he's seeing here. There's people all around the courtyard. He goes on to mention the Raod, which Aeon Reo means punishment or retribution.
So Rio.
Oh, Rio.
Because Reo is spirit.
Yes.
Reo, R-E-O, is punishment or retribution. And it says, since the Reod, when Elantris fell, every person taken by the Sheod had been thrown in through the gates to rot. And it just takes some liberty there and assumes you know what on earth Brandon's talking about when it says the Reod. Obviously, it goes on to tell us later, but we know that the Reod was what happened 10 years ago when Elantris fell. And the reason that Elantris fell is because all of the power in Elantris comes through the door. The door is channeled through Aeons. The Aeons are tied to the land and the geography, and a massive crevice appeared in the land. There was an earthquake, big crack in the land, changed the geography enough to invalidate all of the Aeons.
Yeah, which I think it's interesting that Brandon doesn't mention the earthquake basically at all until they're kind of figuring out that the earthquake was the problem.
Yeah, like there's not much. There's like maybe an offhand comment before we identify it as the problem of like, this happened when Elantris fell, there was an earthquake as well, But yeah, it's not a focus.
Yep. So he's kind of just sitting down at the gate. It's saying he's pushing up against the gate, trying to force his body through it to cleanse his flesh of its taint. So him just like hasn't really accepted what's going on yet. He's kind of like,
Just get me out, you know.
Like, I don't want to be here.
Yes. But you know, he goes through this whole mentality. He ends up realizing I can't be done.
Mhm.
You know, he sees all these people around the courtyard. Some of them are just lying in piles of filth.
Yeah.
Some of them are muttering to themselves, and he's like, I can't be done. And he said, so using his pride like a shield against despair, dejection, and most important, self-pity, Raoden raised his head to stare damnation in the eyes.
Just banger of a line.
Another banger line.
Just before that, I want to mention that it says, but something within him urged Raoden forward, which I marked and wrote, door, question mark? Because we know that for some reason the door likes Raoden that like more.
Yeah,
than
there's
other
something
people?
about Raoden that
The door is like, I want you.
yeah.
I want you. So I just thought like maybe that little something was just a little nudge from some power, but maybe not.
And that might again tie into his name being spirit.
Yeah.
Being Raoden, you know, that's
Yep.
we don't know.
Okay. It goes on to kind of have Raoden have a little flashback about when he would stand on top of the walls of Elantris and look down on it. Which,
Figuratively and literally.
yep. Which another little like
Is that Raoden? You know?
like little bit of pride,
Yeah.
little bit of like, I'm better than you guys, which is just like so different.
Yeah, it's just not the Raoden that we see throughout
Yeah, and maybe
the book.
maybe the Raoden we see is like just starting to become a little more humble,
Maybe he was,
a
you
bit
know,
prideful,
a bit stuck up. But we also know, like, we see people who knew him.
and they always have like shining reviews.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It just feels a little out of place for Raoden.
Yeah, it does. To be looking down on the inhabitants of the city. Now, a lot of that could come from who his dad is and what his feelings towards Elantris are.
Yeah,
We can't
yeah.
discount that.
True. It goes on to say that, you know, every surface in Elantris was covered with grime, and that it was the color of a mix of black and greens and browns of sewage. So, yum.
Tasty.
It's so good. And yeah, so he's in the courtyard, and as he's just sitting there, a woman on the far end of the courtyard just basically started screaming
Really?
with the sound of raw anguish, and she fell silent after the moment. And I think this is our first introduction to someone going hoed, which is basically, we will come to learn that your injuries in Elantris
Don't
heal, and once you get enough injuries, your mind just kind of loses it and
Snaps.
you snap, and you're considered hoid, and you kind of just sit there and like mutter the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first like,
And there's some people who go Hoid that just break my heart in this book.
Oh my gosh. Let's not get into that yet. I can't cry yet. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get into that when they come on screen. But
Yeah.
man, you fall in love with a couple people in this book, and yeah, it's rough.
Yep. We get Raoden being a little pessimistic here.
Which is something we only see Raoden ever do in his mind.
In his head.
Raoden does a really good job at projecting an air of
Confidence and
enthusiasm,
yeah,
and
good
just
times.
yeah.
Yeah, he's really good at that. But he's a little pessimistic. He's basically being like, this is what I'll become. And it's kind of just sad.
Yeah, because he's looking at around all these people who are just covered in grime, and he realizes they're wearing the same clothes he is. With
Yeah.
the ritual like
Burial
cloth
Yeah.
that they sent him into Elantris with, and he's already noticed that he's got a little bit of grime on his from touching the gate, and so he sees all these people covered in filth, and he's like, "This is what I'll become."
Yep. And then he notices some people kind of crouching in the shadows, which we will learn eventually these are Sheor's men, from one of the three gangs in Elantris.
Yeah, so there's 3 gangs that kind of rule Elantris. You've got Sheor, you've got Aendin, and you've got Karada. And basically, when somebody gets thrown into Elantris, they get thrown in with a little bit of food.
Yep, just a little sacrificial basket.
Yeah, it says here it's the ritual Karathi sacrifice sent to accompany the dead into the next life.
Yep.
Which really shows us how the Karathi religion views Elantrians. Like, they are dead in the eyes of the Karathi religion, which is the predominant religion in Kai.
With and I would say not just the Karathi religion, I would say like basically everyone.
Yeah.
Like, if you get taken by the Sheod, you are a corpse. You are dead, and here is your sacrifice for into the next life.
Yes.
Sort of thing.
But this is the only food that Elantris sees.
Yes.
Is the ritual sacrifices that get sent in with the new Elantrians, and everybody in Elantris is hungry. They don't need food to survive, but they're starving.
Yeah.
And so there's these 3 gangs, and again, we know that wounds in Elantris don't heal. Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard to kill an Elantrian. And you're gonna just injure yourself in trying, so these 3 gangs don't really fight with each other all that much. They've kind of created a pact where when somebody steps into Elantris, they'll either have to go left, right, or straight, and one of the gangs will get it based on which direction they go.
Yep. So he notices the men crouching, and then he took a step along the city wall towards the east side, which is Sheor's direction.
Which is the worst decision you could make.
Yep. So he slips into a side street, and he comes across an old man who is begging for food. And Raoden realizes that it's not an old man, and that it's a 16-year-old boy.
Yes.
Crazy.
Which also points out, like, how disfiguring becoming an Elantrian is, and like how it bridges that gap between like 16 and 80, and you just kind of like, you look like an old man, like you're a corpse.
Yeah. So Raoden gives him the small loaf of bread that was in his basket and continues on his way. He then hears shuffling and looks back to find those men taking the food from this boy and fighting over it a little bit.
Yeah, eating it, and then he hears the boy whimpering, and then we see one of the men just take his cudgel and just right on his neck. And it's reading the book as opposed to listening to the audiobook.
Yeah,
it was a much more graphic scene, like having to read through that,
which is interesting because like same Z's, but not same Z's.
No.
So yes, I agree. Like when we go back to that boy and it explains his wounds, it's like, oh my gosh. So the men then start chasing Raoden.
Yep.
Who books it.
He's running away, and eventually he realizes, I don't know if he realizes that they want their food, or he's just getting rid of baggage.
I think he just did it. It says, desperate, Raoden tossed a sacrificial basket over his head. So he does kind of realize it, but he's just desperate at this point.
Yeah.
He's doing whatever he can. So he tosses the food, and then...
Unfortunately, that throws him off balance a little bit.
Stubs his toe.
You've all stubbed a toe.
His little piggy.
Painful. Stubbing your toe hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But
for a couple seconds.
Yeah, for a couple seconds. But you also, like, he's probably got some, well, I guess, I don't know if Elantrians get adrenaline, so he might not have adrenaline.
I would say so. I feel like their mental capacity and, like, that sort of thing doesn't get affected too much until they become Hoed.
Okay.
So I would guess that he probably gets adrenaline.
Okay. Either way, stubs his toe, painful, keeps going.
Yeah. Well, stubs his toe, painful, trips and lands on some crates of wood that squish. Which is just like, ew? You know? But it just shows that like everything in Elantris is dead, dying, rotting, everything. So he's laying there, and then we get this just disgusting portrayal of these men eating this food off the ground.
There's just some like seed corn in there. There's some bread, and this seed corn has fallen into this
The sludge of
that
Elantris.
just coats the floor of Elantris.
Yep.
And we see somebody just reaching down and grabbing a handful of what is probably, I'm going to say 80% sludge and 20% corn.
Probably more like 95.5%.
And he just shovels it into his mouth, and it just starts like dribbling down the side of his mouth. This just tar.
It's disgusting. So yeah, then one of the men realized Raoden's still there, and he reaches for his cudgel to assumably go beat him up.
Raoden for who knows what. There you have his food.
Yep. Raoden then grabs the least rotted piece of wood.
Least squishy
piece of wood he can find. He doesn't hold it up. It doesn't, flop over. Ready to fight. And the guy or the man just is like, not worth it.
Yeah. And one of his buddies behind him ends up finding the flask of wine and shouting in glee. And so he gets distracted. That man kind of takes off, and they all chase him for this flask of wine.
Yep. So the men leave. Raoden is safe. Kind of. He's in Elantris.
Nobody's really safe, but also nobody's really in danger because they can't really die.
Can't die. Yeah.
So
very interesting situation Raoden has found himself in.
And this is where we run into Galadon for the first time.
We all love Galadon.
Our new best friend and Raoden's new best friend. He's sitting there in the debris, overwhelmed, thinking, again, we see the pessimistic side of Raoden thinking, this is what you will become. And then Galadon comes in and he says, looks like they forgot about you, Suli.
Yep. So Suli, being a word in Duladin, Galadon is from Duladel.
Yes.
He is a doula, and he sometimes adds Duladin words or Duladin slang into his sentences. So Suli in this sentence translates to friend.
Yeah.
So he's kind of just like, looks like they forgot about you, friend.
Yep.
Raoden jumps. He's like, who's there?
Because everybody he's seen so far in this city is either like comatose, like catatonic, or trying to kill him.
Yep. So he turns around and he's like, finally, someone who is not one of those two things,
He notices that he's a different race.
Yep.
Even through like the Elantrian disfiguration, the black splotches, he notices that the parts of Galadon's skin that aren't black
are darker
than his own.
Yep. So he's like, I thought everyone in here was dying or insane. And this is when Galadon answers with, you can't be dying. We're already dead, Kolo. Which Kolo means understand, or kind of like,
Yeah.
Like, so he's like, we're already dead, Just, which basically explains Galadon for the first 7/8 of the book.
The rest of this chapter, at the very least, that is going to be Galadon's main point. Suli, we are dead, Kolo.
Yeah. So, this is when Raoden recognizes Kolo, and he's like, oh, he's
your doula then.
Yeah, he's a doula. So, they kind of talk a bit, talking about Elantris being the land of sludge, insanity, and eternal perdition.
Good word there by Brandon.
Love the words by Brandon. Love words of Brandon.
Yes. And we'll get into some of those. Not yet, though.
Not yet.
Probably at the end of this chapter. Give us a couple more pages.
So this is when Galadon then kind of introduces Raoden to Elantris and what it is. And, he explains that your injuries don't heal.
Yes, because Raoden has sat down and is rubbing his toe. Again, they're thrown in nothing but their sackcloth, like their burial shroud. They don't have shoes.
Yeah.
So it's not like he pulled his shoe off and is rubbing. He just sat down and he's like rubbing his toe, and Galadon is like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "I stubbed my toe and it won't stop hurting."
Which, like, I got this put in perspective to me viscerally today.
Yeah. Did you stub your toe?
No, but I cut my finger at work
Okay.
and it wouldn't stop hurting. And I was in an attic. We're electricians, so sometimes we're in attics. Cut my finger and it hurt, and then I kept working and it kept hurting. And so I was looking at it and I was thinking, like, this is how being an Elantrian feels. Because I was just staring at my cut finger and I was just like, it's not going away. It's still hurting like exactly how I cut it. And I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
That's terrible. It's the worst.
And knowing that it's never going to go away.
Insane.
And then everything that you do, every like small inconvenience that you get just adds on top of it.
Yep.
And this is how people become hoeyed.
Yep. Which Galadon, goes on to tell Raoden, and he's talking about the people in the courtyard, and he calls them roulos, which means fools. And this is when Raoden then remembers the boy that got cudgeled.
Yeah, because Galadon's explaining, like, we can't die, and all of our, wounds just remain. They don't heal, but we're not going to die. And this is where we see Raoden. He says, Eidos Domai.
Eidos.
Another Aeon.
Yep. Aeon Eidos means mercy or forgiveness, and then Domai, of course, being the god, or Omai meaning love. So it's kind of the same curse that the maid uses when she goes merciful Domai. It's the same one, just with an Aeon.
Yeah.
Which I think it kind of makes it more like bad.
Vehement.
Like we have soft curse words and we have hard curse words. I feel like using Aeons makes it more of a like harder curse word.
Okay.
So that's my own headcanon.
Yeah.
But he goes, Eidos Domai, and he starts running back to the boy that got cudgeled. Oh, boy.
Says he found him, and it says he was still alive in a way.
Yeah.
And then we get this explanation of what this wound has done. It's basically like opened up his neck, and you can see like inside.
You see
and
the
you can
vertebrae.
see him still like trying to breathe through it, and it's awful.
Awful. Yep. So they then go on to talk about like what they should do. And they bring up like, should we burn the body or like just leave him be? Like, what's going on? And Galadon brings up that like he doesn't have a soul. So
yeah, because Raoden's again like still hasn't wrapped his head around the fact that they're not living.
Yeah.
And so he asks Galadon, like, how long will he live like that?
Yeah.
And Galadon's like, Suli, you don't understand. Like, he's dead. You don't get it. He's dead forever. He'll live like that forever. Like,
yeah.
He's already dead. And so Raoden's like, okay, well, we need to end his suffering.
Right. But they go on to kind of debate on whether burning him would end his suffering.
Yeah.
On whether like he would just disappear into nothingness or he would become pain or all of that. They decide not to burn him, to say the least.
Yeah.
Which I want to mention here. I actually thought of this today. I was going back through this chapter and he's talking about how he doesn't have a soul, which we know is just wrong. Like, this person's still alive. They're not actually dead. He has a soul. But I have a little theory that we are going to dive deep into when we get to basically the end of this book.
Okay.
That the people that go hoeyed actually are existing more in the spiritual realm than they are in the physical realm.
Okay, interesting.
We're not going to get into it now, but we will get into it very deeply later in this book.
Okay.
So they decide not to burn him.
Galadon says he doesn't have a soul, or so the priests tell us. Karathi, Dorethi, Jesker, they all say the same thing. And that's our main introduction into the three major religions, right? We already saw Karathi. That's the religion of Erelon. Dorethi is the religion of Fjordan, or Fjordell.
Mhm.
And then Jesker is the religion of the Duladin Republic,
Yes.
or was the religion of the
Yeah.
Duladin Republic.
We will learn, not this chapter, but I think next chapter, that the Duladin Republic has been invaded by Fjordo.
Yes. And is now like the religion of the state is now Dorethi.
Yeah, so Karathi and Dorethi actually come from, they're like split offs of the same religion.
Yes. So Shu Kiseg was the original religion, and these religions are actually called Shukoroth and Shudireth,
Yeah.
but they just are familiarly titled as Karathi and Dorethi.
Yeah.
But Shu Kiseg was the parent religion, and then they split off. Koroth and Direth were like, they were people
They
who
were
were like studying under Kiseg or something.
Yes, they were the students of Kiseg. And they each kind of took the parts of the religion that they liked
Mm-hmm.
and created their own religions based on that.
And now we see, X amount of years later,
Yeah.
how almost diametrically opposed
Mhm.
those two religions are, which is kind of interesting to see.
Yep. So Raoden Kolos, he
He finally gets it.
he finally gets it, or kind of.
Kind of. I think at the end of the chapter, he might get it.
I don't think he gets it, because the next page, Galadon has to look at him again and be like, Suli, you're dead, Kolo. So I don't think he gets it yet.
Okay.
So we then go on to see Galadon. Oh, sorry. We go on to see Raoden make kind of a big decision here.
Yes.
He looks at Galadon and he's just thinking to himself, and he makes the decision that he's going to trust Galadon.
Yep. And this is as Galadon's walking away.
Yep.
They've decided not to burn the body. Basically, Galadon insisted that they not burn the body because they can't know what would happen, and so they can't make that decision for whoever this kid was. So Galadon's walking away, and Raoden makes the decision, I'm going to trust this guy. And so he follows him.
So then Raoden basically
twists his arm.
Twists Galadon's arm. He wants someone to show him around Elantris and sort of get the rules of the land so he can function in this new life that he's been thrown into. So he goes to Galadon and he says, like, I need you to basically be my guide for the next 30 days. And Galadon's just like, you're Kayana, you're crazy. And Raoden then offers him a dried piece of meat in exchange.
So when Raoden was being taken to the city, he had dropped a piece of meat out of his basket. And for some reason, instead of picking it up and putting it back in his basket, he slid it underneath his robe.
Yeah.
And so when he tossed his basket full of offerings, he had still kept this piece of meat. So he offers it to Galadon in exchange for showing him around. And we see a little bit there, Galadon asks Raoden, like, how do you know I'm not just going to attack you and take it?
Yeah.
And Raoden can see in his eyes that, he's considering that option, But we see Galadon's restraint as well in that moment. And especially when Raoden actually gives him the meat, they make the agreement, Raoden actually gives him the meat, Galadon immediately goes to eat it. Reflexively, he gets the meat and he goes to eat it, and then he stops, and then he puts it in a pocket or something.
Yeah.
Sets it aside.
Puts it in his pocket. So we see a little bit of that Elantrian craziness that we saw in the other men.
Yes.
But then we see him restrain himself, puts it in his pocket, which then I wrote, does he ever eat it? I don't know if we see him ever eat it.
I don't know if we see him on screen eat it.
Yeah.
Because we get more food after that, but
we know he eats more food.
Yeah,
but we never. I guess it never says if he eats that piece of meat or not. Maybe he keeps it as a trophy.
Yeah,
this is when I met Raoden.
So he's they've made their accord. He's got the piece of meat, and then he asks Raoden, like, so what should I call you?
Yeah.
And Raoden's like, you know what? I don't know that I want everybody in here knowing I'm the Crown Prince of Erelon.
Yep.
And so he says, you can call me Suli. Suli works just fine for me.
Yep. Galadon chuckles, private type. And let's get you the grand tour. And that is the end of the first chapter.
We made it
We made it.
through chapter 1.
We have met Raoden. He's a great guy.
Great guy. Now it's time for, what did he say?
What did he say?
This is a segment that we'll be doing every week on our podcast. We are basically going to be going through, and one of us each week will take turns back and forth finding a Words of Brandon through the Copper Mines, asking each other
Through the Arcanum.
Right? Asking each other what the questioner asked Brandon. The other person then has to guess what Brandon said.
Yes. So the first episode, the introduction to the Cosmere, Jackson asked me a question and I got it right, which means I have a point. This week, I will be asking Jackson a question, and if he gets it right, he will also get a point. And we will be keeping these points tallied throughout the entire podcast.
Yes, sir.
So,
What's my question?
question for you. I will give you a quick little thing. This was asked in 2017.
Okay.
This is on Roshar. So I think it was before these two, but the first 3 were out.
Okay.
Okay. Question is, would Kelsier approve of what Taravangian is doing?
Oh, interesting. And just so you guys know, one of the rules of what did he say is we cannot give each other a Raffo.
Yes. The answer is never going to be a Raffo. And it's going to be, we're going to try and keep it answers that we can actually guess.
Yes. And for those of you who haven't read a lot of Words of Brandon, what a Raffo is if somebody asks a question that would reveal too much or give something away that Brandon doesn't want to reveal yet, he'll give him a Raffo, which is read and find out.
Yep.
And so a lot of the questions that are asked in Arcanum, he answers with a Raffo. We will never give each other one of those questions.
No.
So would Kelsier
approve
of what Taravangian is doing up through Oathbringer?
Yes. So we know that Taravangian is part of the diagram or leads the diagram.
Right.
So, and I'm pretty sure we know in Oathbringer that Taravangian is the one that sent Zeth to assassinate all the people. So would Kelsier from Scadrial, leader of the Ghostbloods, be okay, or what was the actual wording? Approve of what Taravangian's doing? And you can answer. There's a little bit here, but a simple yes or no.
I can answer a simple yes or no.
Yes.
The answer is yes.
Explain. This doesn't change whether you get the point or not. I just want to hear your.
Kelsier's whole thing is about like the preservation of his world.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kelsier sacrificed himself for that ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But since then, Kelsier is now leading the Ghostbloods,
Mm-hmm.
who their whole purpose right now is the protection of Scadrial.
Yes.
And they will basically do anything. So I don't know necessarily that Kelsier would help Taravangian because that's more tied to, Roshar. But I know that Kelsier would approve of Taravangian's methods in what he's doing to protect Roshar.
Okay. It's no.
No, it's not.
I understand.
There's no way that's.
I understand your how you're seeing it.
Okay.
And I actually agree for the most part. If we're just talking about, killing people to preserve your homeland, that's Kelsier to a T.
Yeah.
But in Oathbringer, we gotta know that Kelsier is leader of the Ghostbloods. They have their own agenda.
Right.
And so Taravangian killing all these people might not fit what Kelsier needs to happen.
Yes, and that I understand is that I know, like I said, I know Kelsier probably wouldn't help Taravangian because it's not aligned with what Kelsier's trying to
Yeah.
do. But I feel like Kelsier would approve of it. Like, objectively,
Sure.
I feel like Kelsier would approve
Yeah.
of what Taravangian
And I think
doing if Kelsier had the same knowledge, you know?
I think I agree with you. But let me just read what Brandon said.
All right.
He said, no, he would not. He would understand it, but he would disapprove.
Oh, interesting.
So it is
That
interesting
changes my view of Kelsier more than anything.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. Because, like,
Because
pretty much all we know is Kelsier does everything he does in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy for the greater good of Scadrial.
Right.
And everything he does afterwards, once he becomes a cognitive shadow, is for the greater good of Scadrial. That is his main objective.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of, because I don't know that we see Kelsier do anything so overtly like murderous as what Taravangian's doing. I think a lot of what I've attributed to Kelsier comes from the Rosharan Ghostbloods, because we know that Kelsier is the leader of the Ghostbloods, and so I feel like, oh, this is what the Ghostbloods are doing. Kelsier's the leader, and so I attribute a lot of that to Kelsier. But we know that there's like dissension between the Rosharan Ghostbloods and the Scadrian Ghostbloods.
Yes.
And, like, he's not tied into everything.
Yes.
So maybe I need to rethink like my thoughts on Kelsier.
Yeah. I didn't intend for this one to be so tricky.
Yeah.
But as you were explaining, I was like, you know what? Yes, makes more sense. But I think it's just because we don't fully understand Kelsier yet.
Yeah.
So, sorry. No point
for me. No point for me on this first episode.
Yep. Okay, let's dive right back into Elantris.
Yep. So we're gonna end this part of this episode, and we're just gonna jump straight into part 2. So if you're listening, just go straight into the next episode, and we'll pick it right back up.